Today I'm replacing the brake pads on my '07 Aston Martin Vantage. Stock brake pads are pretty dusty. They're not worn out yet, but they're so dusty that I'm going to replace them with Porterfield R4S, which are a higher performance street pad that's actually supposed to be pretty low dust. I have them on my Miata and they seem to be pretty good. So, and I've had seen good reviews on them on the Aston. So that's today's project. So what I'm going to do is walk through the steps of replacing the brake pads, which is actually really straightforward. So first, here are the pads. And there's the part numbers. What I'm going to do is first lift up the car, and there are very specific locations on the frame rails of the Aston with holes in them. So what I've done is I've designed or modified a jack pad to work with the Vantage. This surface sits on the frame rail, and this, I drilled a hole through the pad. This is actually a BMW pad. They have a receptacle for this size. Drilled a hole through it and put a dowel through it, and then there's a little screw in the side of that dowel. And that'll locate a pad in the hole so it can't slide side to side and fall off of the car. That would be a bad day. On the opposite side of the car from where you're going to jack, put some wheel chocks on that wheel so it can't move around. And then release the parking brake. Actually, on the Aston, the parking brake is a different pad or different caliper than the normal brake, so you may not need to release the parking brake on this car, but you typically do. And then I'm going to lift up the whole side of the car and take the wheels off. So let's start with the front brake. Oh, by the way, once you're done changing the pads, you should rough up the disc with some sandpaper just to make sure that the new pads have a nice clean surface to bed to. This rest is just because I cleaned my wheels on the car. The process for replacing the pads is really easy. Basically, you knock out the end of the pin. It relieves the pressure on this spring, and the pins and the spring come off, and then the pads just pull straight out. So I'm going to do that. There are the pins. So these are the pins. That's the spring that sits behind them. Brake calipers. So before pulling out the brake calipers, open the hood. Here's the brake fluid reservoir. What I would do is just set a towel around the brake fluid reservoir. What's going to happen is you need to push the pistons on the calipers in to make room for the new brake pads, and when you do that, it pushes fluid back into the reservoir. You don't want that reservoir overflowing and falling onto something painted. So a towel underneath it will prevent any overage from getting anywhere that's messy. Then take the brake pads out and press the pistons in as they need to be to fit the new pads in. So one note, it's actually really easy to compress the pistons with the pad still on. That'll press the pistons in. That'll make it easy to press the pistons in. Note the wear sensor on the back here, so that's the cable. Just be careful with that when removing this pad so that you don't, break anything. Brake pads on the front are off. Aston uses copper grease for anti-rattle, and I added some of the red kind of rubbery stuff. I'm going to do that on these new pads. I wanted to point out here that the sensor is held on with this little tiny clip. So this clip sits in here, and then the sensor slides in around that clip. You put this around the sensor, and then you slide it into the slot. So to get it back out, you need to kind of just pry this way, pry the sensor off, and it'll come off. Okay, so now I'm going to take the new pads. Well, here's a comparison between the Porterfield and the stock pads. The stock pads have a, well, I added a chamfer to stop the rattle, but the stock pads don't have a chamfer on the side. The Porterfields do. That's part of the anti-squeal mechanism. It also has to do with the pad material itself. So now I'm just going to put the sensor. The sensor goes on the back pad. I'm going to put the red stuff on the back here, and very simply they just slide right in. Alright, so getting the brake pads in, they just slide in. Very simple. The wear sensor. Now on the Porterfields I found that 3 of the Porterfield pads are all the same. They all have the brake sensor slot here. However, the brake sensor for the front driver side on the left in the US needs to be in a lower spot, the opposite spot. So see it's over here. By the way, this is really easy. That's you just after you pry it out, you'll see there's a spring that wraps around the sensor, and you just pry it out of the slot, and then you can just press it into this slot. But anyway, this is the only pad with the sensor in this spot, and that's the spot that it needs to be in, because you can see that the sensor wire goes through this little slot, and if the sensor is put in this slot, it won't go through the wire. So that's something to watch for. From here, it's pretty simple. I'm going to take a pin, put the pin through, I'll tap it in, then I'll put the spring behind it, then I'll hold the spring down and put the other pin in, and the front brakes are done. Okay. Pins tap back in, everything back together. Very straightforward, very easy. This should be probably, once you get good at it, 10 minutes per side. The longest thing will be, well, everything takes a short amount of time. Alright, back brakes. The procedure on the back brakes is actually exactly the same as the front brakes. 2 pins, knock the pins back, they'll come out, spring comes out, just notice the direction of the spring, and then pads just slide out. Again, if you pull the pad out partially and then kind of tilt it against the disc, it'll press the pistons in. Before or after you do a set of pads, go into the car, press the brake pedal. That'll push the pistons against the rotor, and you will not be pressing more and more fluid into the reservoir. That way, every time you change the brakes. Rear brake pads. This is the Porterfield. Here's the stock. So I added a chamfer, but didn't come with a chamfer, and these already have a chamfer. Now, different from the fronts, see this has the same slot for the rear brake wear sensor. The fronts have no slot. Or sorry, this is the outside, this is the inside. That's the inside, that's the outside stock. So the outside stock has a slot as well, but use it. So they didn't put it on that one. And then this is the left driver side. The passenger side, you see the slots in the opposite place. So this is closer to what stock does than having 3 of the same pad as the front does. Now, the procedure is really just the same. I'm going to put the red stuff on the back of these guys and then just slide them in. Here's the little clip for the brake sensor. So you put this around the sensor and then just press it in, and it just snaps right in.
Oh, it's so funny.
So pads slid in, they slide in. You might have to wiggle them a little bit and press on the piston with the pad, but they'll go in there. And now just a reverse. Pin, spring, pin, done. Front done. Rear done. Again, sandpaper on the discs just to clean them off, and then put the wheels back on.